So, on today's episode of Recruiting Roundtable, we're taking a deep dive into the top of the recruiting funnel. And we're going to be talking about sourcing strategies. This is kind of like the front lines, the first people that candidates may talk to when engaging with the company and opportunities. And I think it's a very important function. And we have a fantastic panel of leaders who know sourcing really well and are leading sourcing teams at two very amazing companies. So, we have Lindsay Macolino, who is the team lead sourcing at Datadog, and also Amanda Hippe, Senior Director of Global Sourcing at Rippling. Amanda, Lindsay, thank you so much for joining.
Hi, thank you.
Great. So let's start with some brief intros. Please just introduce yourself, maybe a little bit about your background and what you do in your company, and maybe a little bit of your team as well. Let's start with Amanda.
Sure. Amanda, I am at Rippling right now. I am coming up on almost 20 years in recruiting, which blows my mind when I say that out loud. But right now I'm at Rippling. I've been here for the last 2.5 years. I joined and built our tech recruiting and sourcing team, and I've kind of bounced between either focusing on both functions or just one function. Last year it was recruiting, and then this year in January I was asked to lead our global sourcing effort. And prior to that, I spent a few years at Uber, was part of their IPO, which was really exciting to experience, and also painful too. Disclaimer: IPOs aren't all about parties. And then I spent a long time at Intuit before that.
Okay, great. 20 years in recruiting. I'd love to hear more about that. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Lindsay?
Love that. I'm Lindsay. Like Sean already mentioned, I lead our go-to-market sourcing team at Datadog. I just came up on my 5-year mark in March, which in dog years,
Congratulations.
35 years. Thank you. And so I have a team of sourcers across the US and EMEA, so everything sourcing outside of APAC. Before this, I worked at a recruiting agency, so about 8 years in the recruiting space in total. And I'm a career changer. Before that, I was an elementary school teacher teaching 2nd and 3rd grade. I taught at an international school in Japan and then in Manhattan, and then took the deep dive into recruiting, and no regrets ever since.
That's amazing. And fun fact, I think Lindsay, it was like your first month or something. I was interviewing at Datadog, and you helped you helped with that. I think there was about 1,000 employees at that point in 2019-ish.
Yep, the week I joined, we were 1,000, and now getting closer to 6,000, which is pretty wild.
There you go.
That's awesome.
That's a really cool growth story. So awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. And lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm the host of this podcast. I work for Rocket. I'm also managing director, also and the VP of sales at HireFlow, which is our AI-powered sourcing product. And we take a scientific approach to recruiting. We combine our talented recruiters with our AI model, which we've trained over 7 years, and we help our clients find engaged candidates that are really not possible to do on LinkedIn. So that's what we do. All right, let's take a step back. I love to ask this question because I always get different answers, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into recruiting, like earlier in your career. Maybe let's start with Lindsay. You alluded to this. You started as a teacher, and we talked about this when we were in New York. So maybe share with the group, because I enjoyed that part of the conversation, and I'd love other people to hear about your story.
Definitely. There's a lot of ex-teachers turned either recruiters or salespeople. So I'm sure there's some other ex-teachers listening to this. But for me, when I came back to New York and taught at the private school I was at, it very much felt like a startup. These parents were paying over $50,000 for their kids to go to elementary school and preschool. I was working 12 plus hours a day, getting paid entry-level teacher salary, and all of my friends were going back to get their master's, which you need in your first 5 years after graduating. And it's kind of like, why am I doing this? Is this really what I see myself doing for the rest of my life? And the answer was no. As much as I loved the work that I was doing, I still think it's one of the hardest jobs out there. So I started working with a career coach I found through the Muse, and they helped me get really clear on what I loved about teaching, what I hated, like if I could, wave a magic wand and what my dream job would be. And they helped me narrow down three key areas: account management, operations, or recruiting. And I knew nothing about any of the three, because when you go to school for teaching, that's like all you focus on. And then I just networked a ton. I looked through my LinkedIn connections, saw who I knew in all three of those buckets, and basically just interviewed them and learned a lot about what that could look like. And everything kept getting more clear on recruiting, that really aligned with my transferable skills, what I wanted out of my job. And I learned that what I didn't like about teaching is not being able to see the output from your input, which I've learned to love in recruiting. Lots of data and metrics. It's very clear. I also learned that I didn't want to be in the same role for the rest of my life. I wanted that upward mobility and feeling like I was continuing to progress. So that's like the quickest synopsis I can give you of why I wanted to switch into recruiting.
Okay, that's cool. Amanda, so I know you started your career in sales and then shifted like early in your career into recruiting. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So out of college, spent a couple years doing sales, and had a great run at it. I actually took a break during the summer, traveled a little bit. I didn't have a chance to do like a study abroad when I was in college, so I did kind of like a later on situation like that, but not studying, still
So
abroad.
where'd you travel to?
I went to Europe for the summer,
Nice.
and just just soaked it all in. It was super fun. So I came back and I needed to find a job, and I knew I didn't really want to go back into sales. So I was working at a bar at the time, and then I kind of felt like, hey, I need a little bit more engagement than what I'm doing right now. So I went to a staffing firm and signed up for work, and that was Ultimate Staffing. And they ended up offering me a job as pretty much like a recruiter. So taking the orders that the sales AEs were going out and getting, and then filling them. And I did that, and then moved into the tech sector of that, and spent almost 4 years in at a tech recruiting agency. At the time, it was called Sapphire Technologies. They were acquired by Randstad, I think shortly after I left. Moved from Southern California to SF with that company too, and then basically got my agency scar, my staffing scar, as I like to say. Like, staffing is brutal. It's sales, it's recruiting, it's hardcore. And then made a transition into in-house recruiting in 2012, and that was with Intuit. And then have stayed in this, started as a sourcer, and I've worked my way up to where I'm at now.
So both of you started an agency, and neither of you guys mentioned going there potentially for the money. Was that part of it, or was that part of the motivation at all, or no? Was it more just like you wanted to get into recruiting? Because I know a lot of recruiters get into agency recruiting because they're interested in the commissions.
Yeah. So for me, it was I moved from that admin clerical side that I had been doing for like about 10 months to tech because of the money. A friend of mine a person I worked with that I befriended at that first staffing company I worked at Ultimate Staffing, went over to Sapphire, and she said, hey, like, you can make a lot more money, like bigger spreads, blah, blah, blah. And being in sales, and also, I was an athlete as a kid, and so I just kind of have like a natural competitive side to me. It made so much more sense. But yeah, I definitely think the switch that I made from the admin clerical focus to tech was definitely money driven, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. And Lindsay, was there any motivation there from going from teaching to recruiting?
For me, I was definitely curious. I was like, I can only go up from here coming from a teaching side, because I felt lucky enough that I switched after only two years of teaching. So it was a lateral move comp wise. But I didn't think I had a competitive side to me. So opposite of you, Amanda, I grew up dancing, and it was very much, like individual sport exercise, not team. But I found a competitive side of myself in the agency world I had no idea about, and quickly saw like how motivated I was by the financial upside. I mean, I tripled, close to quadrupled my earnings by the time I left. I was a number one revenue producer. I worked at Bets Recruiting. But then I went to the flip side of, I realized I was burnt out by the time I left, and I realized for me, money wasn't everything. So, and I took over a half pay cut to come here. Obviously, I've worked my way back up over the years, but like finding the balance, I think, between the two for me is really key.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of have balance. I think a lot of recruiters, sometimes they more enjoy in-house, sometimes they enjoy agency, sometimes they do like the RPO thing where they get a little bit of both. So it's an interesting journey. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about what we're here for, sourcing. Um, so you've both been recruiters and you've also like been in the sourcing capacity. How would you break down kind of like the differences and some of the strategic differences between just being a sourcer versus maybe being a recruiter that does sourcing or a recruiter that is working with a sourcing team and is just mostly focused on the vetting and the screening of the candidates? Let's go to Lindsay.
Sure. I think if we're doing it right, a good recruiter still does the job of a sourcer, right? It should be full cycle of they're still owning, from the start of mapping the market, understanding what the talent pool looks like, doing a deep dive there, sourcing and prospecting and screening those candidates and taking them to close. The role of the sourcer is to get really zoned in on that top piece to really help offload that from the recruiter. So ideally, the recruiter is super laser focused on mid to late stage candidates and can have a white glove experience not only with their candidates, but also their hiring managers, and ensure they're doing the best job possible to get the right people in the door and hired into the business. So the way it works at Datadog, because I know sourcing is a little bit different everywhere, but they're owning the talent mapping piece. They're owning the entire prospecting strategy. Some folks on my team own all top of funnel, including inbounds and referrals, where we've seen it help them just have like full visibility into everyone that's coming into the funnel. That's for our more strategic recs like enterprise sales, but that wouldn't work for something, more high volume like commercial sales, for example. And they're screening those candidates, helping sell, qualifying them in and out, setting them up with the hiring manager, and then after that second round interview, passing off to the recruiter to own.
Amanda?
Yeah, so I would plus one everything that Lindsay mentioned in terms of like thinking about an end-to-end recruiter owning, top to bottom. The model that we run here at Rippling is sourcing owns top of funnel, and then we have recruiters that they partner with. I've always kind of like, I think one of the strategic things that I've always proposed when I run teams of sourcers and even recruiters, I've had both functions, like I said, underneath me, is there's no hierarchical difference between a recruiter and a sourcer. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of set that tone with the team, I think there is a lot more collaboration, and together they can be a lot more strategic on how they're going to build their top of funnel, and then through understanding their pass-through rates or their conversion rates, how they're going to work together to ensure we have the right amount of funnel at the top, we're unblocking anything throughout the interview process, and then the closing piece is set up as well as possible, meaning, we're pre-closing from the very beginning, even starting kind of with gathering motivations at that, recruiter or sourcer phone screen, whatever you want to call it, RPS, we call it here. So I think like strategically, sourcers obviously top of funnel, like I said, echo everything that Lindsay was mentioning. Recruiters are going to be more down at the bottom of funnel on the closing piece, a little bit more of, I think, the stakeholder management, but I do feel like, one of my little like secret strategies, if you will, has been kind of setting that tone for the team that there's no hierarchical difference between these two functions, that you guys have to work together and be going in the same direction. And it seems to have worked pretty well.
That's such a good point. And we had to go through that evolution as well because I was the first sourcing leader ever at Datadog. It's scaled a lot in biz and tech since then. And there were sourcers embedded on recruiting teams before I stepped into this role. And it was the opposite of what you just said, Amanda, that they thought kind of like recruiting coordinators, that you had to be a sourcer as like a junior recruiter to get there if you had less years of experience. And it wasn't until like it really had to come from top down to rebrand the career path levelings and make it really clear, like there is no hierarchical difference. And also like people are just choosing these because they have different skill sets, different career path desires, and there's no one that's better or worse than. It's just equal and is. So I love that point.
And it's a great segue into my next question around career tracks, right? And so I know, Amanda, in our initial conversation, you mentioned that in all the companies you worked with recently, Uber, Intuit, they had separate career tracks for sourcing and recruiting. where Lindsay, I think this is like a newer kind of initiative or concept potentially at Datadog, based on what you're saying. So
2.5 years ago, it changed.
2.5 years. Okay, so fairly new. How do you work with different employees on your team that maybe are in sourcing but want to move into recruiting, or maybe they want to stay in sourcing? Like, what are some of those career conversations that you have, and how do you kind of foster growth within the organization depending on whatever career track you want to take? And also, as a side question, do you see some of these people maybe go from sourcing and realize that maybe recruiting isn't for them, and maybe they're looking at other career tracks within the organization? Maybe we'll start with Amanda, because I know you've been in these kind of org structures for a while now, where sourcing was its separate track.
Yeah. So like career development for somebody that wants to stay as a sourcer is absolutely there. And the attributes that I look for in developing individuals, first and foremost, like, are you executing your job flawlessly currently? Meaning like exceeding expectations, really demonstrating that you are a foot into that next level that you're trying to achieve. And I think as you go higher into the sourcing ladder, if you will, ultimately, like, becoming an exec talent sourcer would be a huge win for an individual. Meaning, you're now cultivating relationships at the C level or somewhere like that, where there are there's a ton of demand from a outside agency perspective, and you can be very successful building a book of business where some of the best C-suite talent out there knows who you are, and you can also be working with great companies, great Fortune 500 top tech, big tier companies to place talent at, or non-tech for that matter. So I think it's like sky's the limit, and the path that I've typically seen people that have stayed that course have either as an individual contributor have been moving up into like that executive talent sourcing role. Of course, there's a management track that you can go down, and then if from a transitional standpoint of folks that want to go from sourcing to recruiting, typically what I've done is had those individuals take a couple recs end to end. I typically have them partner or get a mentor, a recruiter mentor that they partner with. And the things that I look for that are giving me signal that this individual is ready and what I want to help either currently develop or help them develop is an emphasis on the stakeholder management piece and their data piece. So those are two key attributes that have to be there from a recruiter standpoint. They also have to be there from a sourcing standpoint, but I want to see these individuals, really spike or index in these areas where I see them, running the top of funnel part of the weekly sync that we're having. They're bringing data. They're answering stakeholders' questions and kind of showing up, thinking a couple steps ahead rather than kind of like flat-footed. And then also, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people talk about when they're talking about career development and opportunities to move from sourcing to recruiting, there has to be a business need, and there has to be, from a level perspective too, like a talent capability perspective, that has to be aligned. So, one of the things that we went through last year with our stakeholders and end specifically was it was very clear to me that we needed like principal level recruiter talent, or like that senior plus level recruiting talent. I'll say most of the sourcers on my team were like mid-level in their career. That was clear to me that the business justification for bringing more recruiting talent on board had to be at that senior plus level, and I didn't have sourcers at that level. And I communicated that to folks. I was clear, part of that career path and career development also includes like business need at the time. But I think it's important to kind of call that out, because a lot of folks sometimes look at their journey as like, I'm ready, or like the role's open, but the business need also has to make sense, I think. But that also doesn't like hold me back from wanting to develop them in areas that they're looking for. Does that make sense?
Of course. Yeah, that's a great, very detailed answer. I really like the fact about the executive recruiting, exec sourcing.
Yeah.
Because at Rocket, we get a ton of these roles, we work on them, and it's tough. and our clients pay big money for it, and it's justified. So if you can help encourage and grow your team to do some of that work, I mean, that's huge value for the business. Lindsay, what are your thoughts on this career pathing conversation?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Amanda said in terms of how we think of it here at Datadog. We are looking in our career path leveling. It's both metric KPI based as well as behavioral areas, and they're bucketed into topics like hiring the best talent, up leveling the team, things like that. There's 5 key areas. And from a sourcer perspective, I'm not sure about Rippling, but for us, we look at offer extends. That's the be all end all goal. Next is diversity, so funnel at second round, and we have that broken down by department and geo. So that's like baseline. You need to be hitting your metrics. There are a bunch of other key leading indicators we track as well, but those are the 2 most important things that they're goaled on. We're also looking, like Amanda said, are they operating already at the next level? Is there a business need? And then the 4th thing I would add is, when we're talking about people to get promoted and move up, is, would it be a surprise to anyone, right? Like, this should be a no-brainer that this person has had such a big impact on the business. And not only are they performing well for themselves, but they're up-leveling everyone around them, that it shouldn't be a surprise. So that's how we think about promotions and career growth. Also similar to Amanda, I've had someone on my team who moved from sourcing to recruiting. We had this person take on full cycle recs, really to give them the exposure, because something I've found is there's a misconception of what people think that they start in sourcing and that they want to be in recruiting. And if you start either asking some questions or give them the experience, it's just not actually what they want, right? So asking them, do you like negotiating? Do you like pushing back on a hiring manager? Do you like being the person who's juggling all of the candidates throughout every single one of your processes? Like, all of those things, and they start getting really clear of, actually, no, I don't like that. Or they try doing it and they realize this isn't what I thought it was. I know for us, given our sourcing team is newer, to your point before, maybe they've looked at their peers and thought they've seen more growth. So they thought it was like the right answer to say, oh, I want to be over there. But it's really exciting to see, my team has, in the last 2 months, we had a couple of reorgs, and we're, growing even more this year. It's doubled in size, tripled in scope. We're starting to see more promotions. And also, similar to Amanda, our team is more like sourcer 1, sourcer 2s, and trying to really spread that out. I have a new senior sourcer joining next week. And on our tech sourcing side, we have principal sourcers. So to me, it's interesting to hear your perspective, Amanda, because I don't see like the be all end all necessarily as the executive sourcer, but I do see that at more established tech companies like Meta, Box. Like, I've seen that at other companies, that's kind of like the ranking. I think there's ways where you can still be that principal sourcer in your own craft, but doesn't have to
absolutely
be executive.
Totally agree too.
All right, so let's get on to some more like the X's and O's and blocking and tackling, the strategies and tools. I'm curious, are there certain tools, like software tools that are in your stack that are just like very important to what you do? Like, they're key central pieces to your recruiting stack and your sourcing stack. And if you could share maybe some of those tools and what kind of value they're bringing, I think that'd be great. And we always love to talk about tools. So let's start with Lindsay on this one.
Sure. Well, Sean, I know we have time to dive into HireFlow at a later date, but outside of LinkedIn Recruiter, I would say the 2 tools we use the most are LinkedIn Talent Insights. That's really helpful for us when we're mapping the market. And I'd also like to add, I don't know, Amanda, if your team does this, but we use that to map the market in the beginning to get a sense of what companies are there, how many people, the percentage of diversity. But then we also will do like a market map where we go company by company, find every single person that exists, whether they'd be a fit or not. We typically do that for leadership recs or any rec that has less than 250 people in the total addressable market. It's just really helped us make sure we're leaving no stone unturned. And then secondly, we use Gem. We had been on Eightfold before. Everyone called it Hatefold. So really happier to be on Gem. I think some of the key features that have really stood out for us, we use Sobo, send on behalf of, so we can do that for hiring manager, or even the sourcers have the recruiter as Sobo in their sequences. The diversity Reporting it's not perfect, but it's better than anything I've ever seen. And prospect search is a pretty good feature in there as well, kind of similar to if you were to pull a report in Greenhouse to find boomerang candidates or silver medalists. I'm probably forgetting some features, but those are the most key ones that stand out.
And so you have GEM connected to your ATS?
Correct.
Yeah, and your ATS is Greenhouse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very cool. That's awesome. Amanda, what about you? What do you got in your stack?
Yeah, so Rippling is probably the most limited tools that I have right now that I've worked with. Of course, LinkedIn Recruiter from the beginning. Uber, we had a CRM there, as well as we used Intello, which I really liked. But here at Rippling, so we use LinkedIn Recruiter. We have GEM as our CRM. And then we use our own ATS. So Rippling built an ATS and launched publicly in about June or summertime of 2023. We started working on it like in December of 2022. So we got to like bang on this thing, give a bunch of product feedback. That's probably one of the coolest things about working here at this company is that because it's, everything's powered by employee data and it's for the employee workforce, we get the opportunity to touch some really cool products that are going to go to market. And so we call it Rippling Recruiting is the product name. We got to use this for about 6 months before it went to market. And so we're on this right now. And then we also use an AI sourcing platform called Covey. We started using this last year around, I think it was like the fall. One of our engineering leaders brought this to us and said, hey, I want to use this platform to augment pipeline. At the time, our sourcing team was like 8 people. We're now at like almost 20. And it's been really cool. And frankly, I think the future is AI. We're expanding our usage here in the next month. And one of the things that I'm going to be measuring, I'll be putting KPIs around how Covey is being used from like an RPS standpoint. So like a percentage of RPSs that sourcers need to be from Covey. What that's going to indicate for me is that they're leaned into this, they're tuning their bot, they understand how to use it. And I also think like moving forward as I think about hiring talent in the next few years, that will absolutely be something that I look for, is that they have experience using an AI sourcing tool, can tune a bot, understand the mental model you have to have around one of these platforms, which is like, if bad profiles are coming to you, it doesn't mean that it's broken. It means that you're not teaching this thing correctly, and you need to think about what you're explaining to it. So limited, I would say, from a sense of like, we don't have talent insights right now, but LinkedIn Recruiter, GEM, and then our own ATS. And then we also have Covey as our AI sourcing tool.
So I haven't heard of Covey. Gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, it's great. And they've been really fun to partner with from like a product feedback standpoint too.
Very cool.
There's so much to unpack from your comment, Amanda. I think two things. One is I love what Rippling's doing. We talked a little bit about this, and you kind of broke it down for me about how Rippling is basically building a platform like Salesforce, but instead of with customer data, it's with employee data. And I think it's just very powerful what you're building. So, congrats to the team at Rippling for the ATS.
Yeah.
And, look forward to seeing more products. And then second, around how you're using Covey, I just love that because to your point, the new, like everyone's saying like AI is like taking over the world. And it really is, because if you don't understand how to use it properly, that's going to be the difference, right? Because there's amazing AI tools out there. We mentioned Covey. I know.
Yeah. Or at minimum, even ChatGPT, as you're like thinking about your messaging, like that's like one of the most like bare baseline things that you can do to engage with an AI tool. But continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries. I'm just kind of reinforcing the point that you made, which I think is a very valuable one, which is like, you got to embrace how to use it and get better at it. And I think, Lucy and I talk about this all day. Like Lucy's amazing with it. I'm not as good. And I think I better get better, or else I'm going to be a dinosaur soon. I want to mention something, Amanda, while I got you on the spotlight. You said something to me that was very interesting. I think it was yesterday when we talked about how there's a huge opportunity for sourcers to be marketers. And I want to unpack this a little bit, because when I think of sourcing, and I ran an agency for almost 4 years, and when I think of sourcing, I think of like crafting an interesting message and then messaging a candidate on whatever platform. That's what I think of. the concept of a sourcer as a marketer is it's interesting. So can you talk to me about that? And then I'd love to get Lindsay's, feedback on your comment.
Yeah. So, even back when I was a sourcer, I was always really curious and passionate about like what I was going to put out there to attract this talent. And, one of the more like low hanging fruit, exercises that a sourcer or a recruiter can do that is thinking like a marketer is go to your employee base that you are working with, meaning like if I'm hiring engineers, I've got a bunch of engineers in front of me or product designers or whatever you want to call it, right? And ask them about the messaging that you're putting out, get feedback from them. Like they're essentially your customer right there. And you don't have to go out into the world of like prospecting passive talent without having some sort of like confidence, let's say, in terms of what you're going to put out there to try to elicit a response. Even if it's a no, I'm not interested right now. So like when I think about like sourcing, I think of like, it's so freaking competitive out there. Like everybody's on LinkedIn Recruiter. Like there are, whether it was, pre kind of this downturn that we've all weathered, or it's now, like there's still a lot of opportunity out there to fill recs. And so you have to like differentiate yourself, whether it's within your team or externally, and who you're competing with from other companies for that same talent. And I think like putting that kind of like mental model down of like, okay, how am I going to differentiate myself? Like, how am I going to elicit that response? Let me go get some feedback from people from like the same customer base that I'm trying to go after. And then using things like Chat GPT. Now I realize like sometimes you could put like a message you wrote into there and it'll sound very AI, but that's fine. You don't have to use that exact one. You can kind of like retool it a little bit. Of course, personalization, that's like one of the also kind of like baseline, I think, approaches to being a marketer or being a great sourcer and messaging like a marketer. And then channels too. Like I think one of the things, going back to kind of like using your customer base that you have here at your company, is like ask them where they are typically engaging about jobs. Is it on social? Is it on email? Do they just look, to apply to places when they're ready to look for a new job? So it's thinking about it by channel. It's thinking about like the base that you have currently in front of you, and then leveraging tools that you have, like I said, Chat GPT, to help kind of like clear up your messages. Also, one of the low hanging fruit kind of things that I tell sourcers is send your message to yourself and make sure it's not more than 2 thumb scrolls on your phone. Like 90% of people are going to read your message, whether they're commuting back and forth from work or doing something on their phone. And think about how you interact with an email from some random person. It's typically like more than 2 thumb scrolls, you're going to like move on from the next thing. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about like the marketer hat of a sourcer. And there are like really low hanging things that you can go after around you, I think.
Lindsay, what are your thoughts on sourcer as a marketer?
Yeah, I haven't heard it phrased that way, Amanda, but I love that. And I agree with everything you said. I'd add 3 things. The first is, I think a lot of, sourcers and recruiters, right, think that inbound and like posting on LinkedIn is like a death trap because it can lead to a whole can of worms. But even if it's like 1 out of 100 people that message you that's a good fit for the job, I think some of the best sourcers really build their brand, and they're posting content that is authentic and drives their brand across their network. And so when that passive candidate you've been going after for 2 years and has been sent like 20 emails from everyone on the team after they've been seeing all their posts, you're going to be the person that they reach out to. So I definitely think that's one thing really excellent sourcers do. Could be recruiters too. Secondly, I love what you said about picking the brains of people who get these messages. We've done a training where we actually had an enterprise sales leader take screenshots from their LinkedIn inbox, and we had a great time laughing through these, because it is amazing how many awful messages that they receive on a day-to-day basis, and being reminded how many they receive if we're talking about top tier talent. Like some people mess up their name, they say the wrong company, like there is no personalization to your point, or like it's so long, and it actually just reminds you, if you just make a couple quick changes and, like you said, asking for their opinion of what would make them respond, really goes a long way. Something we try to do, like putting on our sales hat, because 3/4 of my team is on the sales side, is coming up with a hypothesis. If you look at someone's profile, how long have they been there? What do we know about market intel? Why might this person be looking or not looking? What could be interesting to them? And then how can we leverage that in our message versus making it seem like it's a canned message that's going to anyone and everyone? So that's the second piece. And then the third piece, I think, kind of falls in this bucket. We've coined our own term. We're trying to be sourcing influencers over here. We do something called network mining sessions. So I'm sure, Amanda, your team's probably doing this too. But when we kick off a role, we're trying to think of our first and like secondary and tertiary circles of who know these people. So like, for example, if I said enterprise sales, the first circle would be those enterprise sales reps, the hiring manager, other enterprise sales leaders. The second circle could be the sales engineers and other mid-market AEs. And then the third circle is maybe even people on the marketing team or the SDRs. And so you can go into LinkedIn Recruiter. If someone has their connections as open, literally click on the 500 plus button. If it's blue, it's open. And then pull a search by searching through their connections. And sometimes, you'll find no one. And sometimes you'll find 20 people. And depending on how many we find, we'll actually have like a live session with that person. And we've seen that over 4x from Q4 to Q1. And we're seeing more and more influenced referrals come through from our team doing this, which I do think is more kind of thinking like a marketer in a way.
Wow. We could probably go for another half hour, but we're kind of up on time today. I want to say thank you to both Amanda and Lindsay. Appreciate your time. And look, I want to end by saying this. I was really excited about this episode because Datadog, Rippling are two companies I really look up to, and I think that are amazing success stories in the market over the last, call it 10 years. And there's a reason why, right? Like when you hear some of the strategies and the thinking and the creativity and the strategic thinking and how you're going to build a team coming from both Lindsay and Amanda, it's not a coincidence that these companies are doing well. So I wanted to say congratulations on both of you for your successes. Continue doing what you're doing. Continue being great. And for those listening, thanks for tuning in. Until next time.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Lindsay.